The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Secretary General, distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to warmly congratulate Annalena Baerbock on her election as President of the 80th regular session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Her leadership and her commitment to multilateralism will be crucial for the success of our work. I also here at this podium would like to pay tribute to her predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang, whose commitment and dedication were critical to the previous session. Lastly, I reaffirm my country's full trust in the actions of the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his unwavering efforts to strengthen our organization and to promote solutions to the challenges threatening peace, security, and prosperity throughout the world, especially in the region of the Great Lakes of Africa, which includes the DRC. Madam President, I commend the relevance of the theme of this 80th session, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. It highlights 8 decades of joint efforts of a UN dedicated to peace, development, and universal well-being based upon an unwavering promise of collective security. The 80th anniversary of the United Nations, which is the guarantor of this security and has been since 1945, is an opportunity to reaffirm the virtues of effective multilateralism and to pay tribute to the ideals of peace, human dignity, and solidarity between nations, which inspired its founders. Although the United Nations remains a pillar for the regulation of international relations, as well as the prevention and resolution of conflicts and the promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms, today it is facing systemic challenges which are putting its credibility and capacity for action to the test. The profound changes ongoing during our era, especially protracted armed conflict, climate deregulation, recurring humanitarian crises, and constantly evolving transnational threats, remind us that multilateralism is not an option, it is a necessity for all of us. We remain convinced that the responses to the challenges of the 21st century can only emerge from collective solutions based upon cooperation, justice, and shared responsibility. Madam President, after its election in June, the DRC is preparing to sit as a non-permanent member on the Security Council for 2026-27. I, on behalf of my country, once again sincerely thank the member states for the trust and solidarity they've shown toward us. Our participation will be firmly constructive and holistic. It will be based on 2 indivisible priorities: peace and security on one hand, and prevention and resolution of conflict on the other. We also plan to actively contribute to the development and implementation of a new agenda for peace in order, through our capacity and our experience, to propel reforms of peacekeeping and peace-building operations, as well as the adaptation of the UN collective security system. With regard to Security Council reform, my country reaffirms the common African position as enshrined in the Ezulwini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. Africa must hold 2 additional seats in the non-permanent member category and 2 seats in the category of permanent members with the same rights, including veto rights, the same privileges and the same obligations as the current permanent members. With its 54 states and more than 1.2 billion inhabitants, Africa can no longer remain on the sidelines of decisions that concern international peace and international security. Madam President, another priority is the illegal exploitation of natural resources, one of the major and most persistent causes of conflict. The DRC plans to center debate on exemplary governance of strategic minerals in order to guarantee exploitation that complies with the principles of sustainable development, economic sovereignty, and people's well-being. On a global scale, breaking the toxic link between profit for mining and financing non-state armed groups requires a comprehensive approach based on harmonizing rules of due diligence and traceability from mines to the consumer, the comprehensive transparency of supply chains and effective beneficiaries, independent mechanisms for oversight and audit, strengthened operational and cooperation between customs, judicial, and financial authorities, targeted and effective sanctions against traffickers and their networks, and a staunch fight against corruption, supported by standards of good governance, public contracts, and the traceability of payments. Of course, the dimensions of human rights and transitional justice, as well as the women, peace, and security, and youth, peace, and security agendas, remain indispensable to this action. Their effective inclusion is the precondition for a just, lasting, and inclusive peace. Madam President, in the run-up to the establishment of the Independent Commission of Inquiry established by the UN Human Rights Council on the massacres perpetrated a few months ago by our assailants and their proxies in the east of my country, I solemnly call upon the international community. It has the moral and political duty to support this crucial body in order to establish truth, bring justice to victims, and lay the groundwork for a lasting peace rooted in memory and shared responsibility. Madam President, as the planet warms, marginalization becomes deeper and conflicts multiply. The diagnosis that in July 2023 inspired the vision for a new agenda for peace by Secretary General remains as relevant as ever. The world is now facing multifaceted and profound crises. The foundations of prevention have been weakened, and international law, so strongly enshrined in the UN Charter, which calls upon states to refrain from the threat or use of force, is too often flouted. Our system of collective security is being shaken. It will not survive without a massive increase in solidarity of interest and compliance with rules. In this context, the rhetoric of war is gaining ground, and we are helplessly watching the return of old demons, armed aggression, wars over resources, and for the conquest of vital territory, which have spared no continent. While the war between Israel and Hamas is ravaging Gaza with the risk of regional spillover, and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict continues, other hotspots are raging in Yemen, Myanmar, and Syria. The armed conflict that is continuing in my country is a tragic example of this. For 3 decades now, peace and security have broken down in the east of the DRC. This war has transformed into a predatory enterprise. It has long since transcended merely military or geopolitical dimensions. It aims to pillage our resources, erase our collective memory, and destroy our communities. Its consequences are catastrophic: millions of deaths, decimated families, almost 7 million IDPs, women and children who've been targeted, villages razed to the ground, generations sacrificed. In several regions of the East, we see all the indicators of an attempt at extermination. The UN itself, through the mapping report, has documented the scale of these atrocities. This is not just a conflict. It is a silent genocide that the Congolese people have been suffering for more than 30 years. In July, more than 300 civilians, including 48 women and 19 children, were massacred in the territory of Rutshuru by the AFC and M23 with the support of the Rwandan Defense Forces. These crimes are not isolated incidents. They are part of a gruesome whole. I thank the United States for taking the initiative last month of convoking an extraordinary session of the Security Council to examine these massacres, which were documented by Human Rights Watch. To end this conflict, the Security Council, in Resolution 2773 of February 21st, 2025, called for the withdrawal of M23 from the cities of Goma and Bukavu and from all the areas under its control, as well as for the dismantling of the parallel administrations established in violation of the sovereignty of the DRC, as well as an end to all assistance, direct or indirect, to M23. Here I commend the leadership of President Donald Trump, who paved the way for a dialogue that led to the signing on June 27, 2025 in Washington of a peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. This agreement explicitly requires that Kigali carries out a complete and verifiable withdrawal of its troops and lifts so-called defensive measures. It also calls for the disengagement, disarmament, and conditional integration of non-state armed groups within the armed forces of the DRC and the Congolese National Police, the establishment of a joint mechanism of security coordination, as well as a provision